It's great to have you along tonight on Newsmax Prime, and we hope you will make time for us each weekday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern for America Talks Live. On that program, we tend to cover stories that the alphabet networks just failed to spell out, like this one. Mexico now issuing transit visas to African immigrants from countries that are hotbeds of Islamic terror. We spoke with the president of the Federation for American Immigration Reform, Dan Stein, earlier today on America Talks Live. Dan says that Mexico is not helping us solve our illegal immigration problem.
Mexico is not helping anything at all. Our asylum law is supposed to be reserved for people who come here legally and as a result of changed circumstances cannot go back home, say a coup or something. What's going on now is international smugglers have figured out that you can make an asylum claim after entering illegally. So, not surprisingly, people from Africa are being smuggled into places like Mexico. The Mexican government, knowing full well they're going to go to the U.S. illegally, has them coming in. They give them these little transit visas for several weeks so they can find their way to the U.S. border. And the next thing you know, they're here making an asylum claim. Now, that's different than a refugee claim. An asylum claim gets treated differently. There's a lot more procedural process. So an alien gets a big advantage, J.D., by getting inside the U.S. first to make the asylum claim. And FAIR has argued for years that if an alien is, forum shopping, like stopping through 3 or 4 safe countries on the way here, they can't be a true refugee. A refugee is supposed to be in life-threatening situation, willing to take safety wherever he or she can get it. Not saying, the UK looks nice, US looks nice, I'll pass through 18 countries until I get where I want to go. And it's our policies, and just like it's been Germany's policies, that have been manipulated and have created the crisis. Mexico obviously is not helping the situation at all.
Let's go to our phones at 1-877-NEWSMAX, 1-877-639-7629. From the borough of Brooklyn in New York, Lorna is on the line. Lorna, welcome to America Talks Live. Thank you for calling in. What's on your mind?
Oh, what's on my mind is that people in certain position and certain stature don't really understand the situation or have not really been in it to see what's going on with refugees and things like that. For instance, when the Russians came to, I'm in Brooklyn, as I said, came here, they were given green cards, as they call them, permanent residents. They came in and they cost us the copious amount of monies. They had triple, quadruple bypasses. They got a house, they got apartment, they got food, they got clothes.
So, in other words, what you're telling us is that people come here and they scam the system.
What I'm saying that we are speaking about a certain subgroup of people and not about what has really happened and who was able to get in and why.
Well, let us disabuse you of the notion if we are singling out one group. You mentioned Russians. I think indeed.
That's the reason why. Because
well, I'm so glad you did. And I can tell you that there are sizable numbers of Chinese trying to get into the country, and there are sizable numbers of nationalities from across the globe. But pressing right now, when our commander-in-chief issues a specific invitation to refugees from the Middle East, and when we see what has happened there, that is why it is the news hook. It does not invalidate your comments, Lorna, and we appreciate you adding that to the public record here on America Talks Live. That is part of what this is all about. So I would not contest Lorna's point about Russians and others who have come in and, quote, gamed our system. This is not hostility directed at Mexicans, Africans, anybody. As I said, Dan, when I was on Capitol Hill, I don't care if you're from Ireland or Iceland. I don't care if you're from Mexico or Mauritania. If you're trying to pull a scam on the American people in terms of immigration law, you ought to be stopped.
Well, JD, you know, the point here is that refugee admissions are very political, and what decisions are made are often subject to the pressures or whims of an administration. And the more important point is refugee admissions are very, very expensive. They get fast-track treatment, all the benefits and special add-ons. It is much more economical and beneficial for the American taxpayer if we work to help refugees where they are, protect them where they are for eventual repatriation back to their home country. Resettlement in this country should only be an option of last resort and only after every other conceivable alternative has been considered.
And you are correct that we are playing fast and loose with the definition of refugees. Our caller, Lorna, making mention of the Russians. Indeed, after the prolonged period of the Cold War and an estrangement with the former Soviet Union, there may have been a more indulgent attitude toward Russian refugees at the time. Indeed, we could remember back 4 decades to the problems in Cuba and a massive influx of, in my view, legitimate refugees coming from Cuba. But it is very different from what we are seeing now. In Central America, for example, the designation of, quote, refugees from nations where there is not jeopardy, there is not war, there is simply an economic system that fails to live up to being able to provide jobs for citizenry. And thus you see this rather elastic definition of just exactly who is a refugee under the current administration. There's something else going on, Dan. With the 2 minutes we have left, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up. Your legislative update laments the fact that more qualified Americans are losing their jobs through H-1B outsourcing. Very briefly, describe the nature of this problem and this disconnect with official Washington and everyday Americans.
Well, the H-1B program, which goes back to 1990, has been increasingly abused by American corporations who bring in foreign workers and then require American workers to train their own replacements. Right? It's like basically taking yourself to the gallows. And in many cases, these H-1B workers are then used to outsource technology. So the whole concept of the H-1B program, which was temporary, short-term, unforeseeable shortages, has now turned into a program to basically displace American workers wholesale. And at a time when we've outsourced so many manufacturing jobs, we're seeing the way H-1B workers are not only displacing Americans in our own country, but being used to outsource and steal technology as well.
We saw rather tearful and eloquent testimony from a STEM worker, technology, mathematics worker, someone in the computer industry who was employed at Disney World and forced to train his own replacement for some meager salary while he turned over his job to someone who came in at a lower wage. And this kind of war being waged on American workers courtesy of the H-1B program is something that I certainly have rethought in my days since serving in Congress. And just candidly, Dan, I think it was a huge mistake we made listening to the siren song of Silicon Valley, because the facts don't comport with the arguments offered by the internet titans who claim they need this cheaper labor coming into the United States. Dan Stein from the Federation for American Immigration Reform. This afternoon from Newsmax Washington. Dan, as always, we appreciate your insights and analysis here on Newsmax TV. And we also appreciate that nice lady from Brooklyn, Lorna, who called in because interesting discussions are also a part of America Talks Live. Speaking of discussions and your perspective, we would love to hear from you. Why don't you send your comments to me at newsmaxtv.com/comments. You can also send your comments via Facebook and Twitter. And on Twitter, our handle is @Newsmax Prime. Still to come tonight, is our nation giving preferential treatment to Muslim refugees as opposed to Christian refugees from Syria? We'll talk about the numbers with activist Johnny Moore as he offers the latest on Christian persecution. And Johnny also maintains that a new word should be put into our dictionary: Christophobia. After all, we hear so many on the left talk about Islamophobia. Johnny joins us to talk about the fact that in this case, a word can perhaps prompt corrective action. So he is lobbying, trying to persuade those who put together the dictionary henceforth to include the term Christophobia. We're glad you're not Newsmax TV-ophobic. We will be back with more as Newsmax Prime continues right after this.